Hi folks, this is Andy. Today I'd like to run through some of the commonly used tools and facilities that are available within GIMP photo editing. To show you an example of the kind of things you do, I thought it would be useful to go through an end-to-end process of restoring an old photograph. The image I have here is a photograph that was taken about 35 years ago. This is the print that's been scanned into the computer. With it being such an old print, the colours faded somewhat, the contrast isn't great, so we're going to clean this up in GIMP. So let's get started. The first thing you need to do is open up GIMP. I use version 2.10.14. I would strongly recommend, if you have an old version of GIMP before 2.10, that you upgrade to the latest version. There are some facilities which are very useful that are only in 2.10. Once you've opened up GIMP, then we need to bring the image in. So we just click on File and then Open. Select from the tree structure on the left hand side, find where our picture is. This is the one that I'm interested in, and we click Open. Brings the image into the main window here. Just a brief word on the layout. You can open multiple images at any one time, and the different images line up across the top here. You have the menu structure beneath the menu bar options here. On the top left you have the toolbox area. This is a palette of all the different tools that you can select from. If you click on the different tool options, you'll see that the area on the bottom left changes to show all the relative parameters relating to that specific tool. On the bottom right corner you have a list of the layers that you currently have relating to the image that you're currently working on. You can have multiple layers. Today we're mainly concentrating on the one layer, so we won't be using this so much. And then in the top right hand corner you have an area where you can show different sets of information. At the moment this is showing brush styles for your editing. What I tend to use is the histogram. I find that very useful personally, so I tend to leave that showing as the histogram. The image we have here, obviously you need to be able to zoom in and out. I tend to use the control button and then scroll with the mouse scroll wheel, so you can zoom out, you can zoom in, and you can tell where you are from the zoom factor setting down here. So we're currently at 100%. Also you can use the minus key on the keyboard to zoom out and the plus key to zoom in. Okay, that's the basic layout of the GIMP window. We'll get starting editing, and what I like to do, this is just something that I do, I find very useful, is when I've been editing an image for a while, I can lose track of all the things I've done to it. So I find it useful to actually keep a copy of the original image that I've brought in. A simple way I've found of doing this is to click on the image little thumbnail here, and then if you click on the image menu option and click on duplicate, or you can do it through Control D if you want the keyboard shortcut, that creates you a duplicate image. As you can see, it's coming up here as untitled. Don't worry too much about what it's called. As I say, I tend not to do anything with it in the long run. I just find it useful to refer back to. So we'll go back to the original image. Now what we want to do is to make some changes. Because I've scanned this in, I've deliberately put the image at a slight angle just to show what you can do. I found it difficult to get a perfectly flat image on the scanner, so I've deliberately set this to an angle so it's off kilter. And also, I've also scanned in part of the scanner background as well, just so you can see what I've done. So the first thing I want to do is actually level the image to get it flat. You can also do this if you take the image and you realise that when you've taken the photograph, you've actually been at a slight angle, or it's not exactly the angle you want. The way to do this is to use the rotate tool, which is this one just here. So you click on the rotate tool and then you click the image and you bring up the little dialog box here. Now I tend to use this little eject symbol, which gives you a free floating window. Personally I just find it kind of easier to do it that way. What you can now do is you can change the angle, so you can move up and that moves clockwise, or you can move down and that moves anti-clockwise. What I've just done there is I've pressed and held on the down button, and as you can see it whizzes around really quickly. So it's probably better to use very small individual clicks, or you can change the figures here to whatever you want them to be. What I'm going to do is just move it around slightly anti-clockwise, and I've decided that's probably the way the image needs to look. That's my preference. So once you've got it exactly how you want it, you click on the rotate button and that then applies the rotation. If you've got an image that's got lots of straight verticals or straight horizontals and you want to line the image up to those, then what you can do is click on the view menu option. Down here there's an option that says show grid. If you click on that so that it highlights the show grid, you get a little checkbox against it. That gives you a grid on the image. Now you can't see it at very low resolutions, low magnifications, but if you zoom in you will start to see this grid appearing. This I find very useful, so if you're trying to line up to a vertical or a horizontal, and what you can do is show the grid and then do your rotation, and you can actually see it starting to line up with the grid pattern. It is a very useful technique. What I'll do is I'll take that off for now because I'm not too worried about the horizontal and vertical elements for this image. Next thing I'd like to do is to get rid of the white border, so we've just got the full frame image. To do this, basically use the crop technique. The way I tend to do it is I go to the select rectangle select tool on the toolbox, and then you can drag on the image the area that you would like to capture and crop to. So I'm just taking out the white border. You can click in the corners and move that corner, or you can click on the edges and move that edge, or you can click in the middle and move the whole selection. If you want to maintain a specific image ratio, for example, if you need everything to be exactly square, what you can do is use a tool option down here. This shows you the aspect ratio, which is currently set to 1:1, 1:1. Now the rectangle that we've selected, as you can see, isn't a perfect square, The reason why that's doing nothing is because the fixed aspect ratio option is not clicked. If you click on that there, when you try and change the selection, you find that it jumps to being purely square. That helps you to have a fixed ratio. You can use it for square or a 3:2, which I have on my camera. I'm just going to turn that off because I'm not too concerned about being exact on this image. So you highlight the area that you want to keep, and then you can click on image crop to selection, or you can just put your mouse cursor inside the selection, right click with the mouse, and then go down to image and crop to selection. Now I'm showing you this right click because this is quite useful. What you can do with the menu options up here is you can do things globally to an image, but also if you have a selection within a part of an image, you can go in here and you can do things in a context way, so that you can change colours specifically for that selection, and all sorts of other things. So going back to what we were doing, image crop to selection, and we've just basically taken out the white border. The next thing you want to do is, there are a few blemishes with this being a scanned print. There are a few artifacts that have come from dust on the scanner, marks on the print, that kind of thing. To check out the image, what you can do is you can scroll in and you'll see that you can get close in and you can go through and check. It's quite often easier to see them on the sky than anywhere else. So I'm not sure how easy it is to see, but there's a little dust filament that's showing up on the sky. One of the beautiful things in GIMP, which I've not come across in other older photo editing tools before, is a thing called the healing tool. This is the one that looks like two elastoplast strips crossing each other. So if you click on that, what you can do is, I would adjust the size relative to what you're trying to fix, and generally probably use something reasonably small. So I'm going for a size 10, so that's 10 pixels across. Now the way you do the healing is you choose an area that's similar colour, similar pattern to what you're trying to fix, and because this is sky, I just choose something with a similar level of brightness. You hold down the control key, then do a click, release the control key, and you'll see that it's remembered where you are. And then what you do is go to the area you want to fix, and then press and hold on your left mouse button and basically just wipe across like that, then release, and hey-oh, it's disappeared. I find this technique particularly useful for tiny little blemishes. There is also the facility if you've got larger areas that you're trying to fix. So if we just zoom out a little bit. What I've done is I've actually deliberately placed this blob on the skyline just to show how it works. And if we try to fix this with a healing tool, we'll select that piece there, and then we try and heal it. And find, well, actually nothing's really happening, and that's because healing tools works by trying to fix the destination area based on the source, and because they're very different, excuse me, it's having a hard time of it. So in this instance, what you can do is you can use the clone tool, which is the one that looks like a stamp, and it works in very much the same way. Just increase the brush size a little bit. Again, control, click to wherever you are that you want to clone from, and then you can basically press and hold the mouse button down and you can fix the image like that. If you've got something that is slightly more patterned than a plainish sky, then what you will want to do is, once you've finished going through it, you can revert back to the healing tool and go over and heal where you just cloned, and you will find that works really, really well. That's something that I would recommend you trying out for yourself. I found it a really useful technique. Okay, I'm going to leave the other imperfections for the time being so we can crack on and show you something else. The next thing I'd like to go through is the colour and also the brightness levels. As you look at the image here, it is a little bit misty, I guess. I think that's the phrase I would use. Not particularly contrasty, not jumping out at you. And you will find this if you have images where you're not using the full spectrum of light. And when I say spectrum, I'm talking about from black to white. Now the histogram here is very useful because this shows you what is contained within the image. If you can see just round here, there is an empty spot, and this is where the blackest part of the image is not actually 100% true black, so it's missing an area of darkness, and that's affecting the contrast. Now what you can do is, within the colours menu option, there is the levels control, and in here you'll see a flattened version of this histogram, and you can adjust using these little triangles. You can adjust the level of complete blackness. As I'm moving that, you can see it's making the image darker but also more contrasty. And you can do the same thing for the little white triangle here. You can move those around. I find this a great tool when I've got an image where I'm missing something off either the black end or the white end. In the case we've got here, I'm not going to do that because I want to show you something else. If you've got an image where the colour is also not exactly to your liking, if you've got a colour cast on an image that you want to get rid of, then quite often you can solve that fairly simply. And the way to do that is to go into the colours options, down to auto, and then select white balance. When you click on that, what it does is it goes through, it adjusts the levels, and it also adjusts the colours. So now you see the image has changed quite dramatically. The sky is more blue, the sea is more blue, the buildings are more their correct colour. If we go back to the original image, I'll just zoom in slightly, you can see that it's made a dramatic difference already. Quite often that will fix a lot of your problems. If it doesn't, then you also have the ability to go into colours, and there's like colour balance where you can adjust individual red, green, blue levels, so you can get it exactly how you want it. From a purely personal point of view, once you've applied the auto white balance, I feel that that can be a little bit cold, a little bit blue. So personally, I tend to warm the image up just very slightly. Now you can use different settings within colour balance, hue, chroma, hue, saturation, to affect the slight change in colour. But what I found really nifty is the colour temperature option here. If you go into colour temperature, this adjusts the colour of the light that is being used. The colour temperature 6500 it represents standard white daylight. That is kind of a bright white. Old-fashioned incandescent tungsten filament light bulbs are around 3000 degrees. They come out quite yellowy, quite orangey. So that's kind of where it's coming from. You have options here. I personally think these options are the wrong way round. You have original temperature and intended temperature. And to me, that means that I'm starting off with this image and I want it to become a little bit warmer. Warmer means a cooler colour temperature. So if we take the colour temperature down of the intended, what we actually find is it's actually gone bluer, which is the opposite of what I wanted to achieve. So what I'll do is I'll set that back to 6500 and I'll drop down the original temperature. So take it down to about 6000, so not very much. And you can see on, if you toggle the preview button, that's before, that's after, that's before, that's after. I quite like that setting, so that's what I'm going to choose for my image. This is all a personal choice. If you prefer it with more of a steely blue feel to it, you can choose that as well. That's absolutely your choice. Okay, the next thing I want to do is there is an area of the image just here where some of the buildings are a little bit dark. Most of the image looks okay, but this area here and also this building here I feel could do with brightening up a little bit. There is a useful technique that you can use which is very useful for faces of people when they're outside in bright sunlight, and if the sunlight is coming from the side, quite often you'll have a stark, harsh shadow on one side of the face. If you can't control that, then what you can do is, after you've taken the image, you can come into GIMP and go into colours, shadows, highlights. In here you have a shadow section and a highlight section, and the shadows, if you increase that fairly highly, so that's gone up to about 50-60%, you'll see that the buildings around here are being brought out a little bit better. You can see them a little bit better. I try not to be too dramatic with it, so for me that's probably not too bad. You can all do the same thing with the highlights. You can also increase the highlights, or you can decrease the highlights as well. As you can see, when you decrease the highlights, like the sky went a very different colour. For this image I'm going to leave the highlights where they are. But what you can also do is you can change the compress factor. Now the compress is essentially the difference between the highlights and the shadows. So you get different effects on different pictures, so I would just suggest playing about with it. Try it on 25%, try it on 75%, see which one you like. For this image I quite like it on the 25%, so that's looking pretty good to me, so I'm quite happy with that. So click OK to save your changes. Now the one thing I do find is on my digital images and also on the scans, if I'm scanning in old photographs, sometimes the colours lose some of their oomph, for want of a better technical phrase. So what I like to do is increase the overall colour saturation. You can do that for specific colour channels, so red, green and blue, or you can do it overall. So in colours you can change hue saturation, which changes it for the individual channels, but often I'll go into just the saturation one, which changes it for all channels equally. It just gives everything a little bit of a boost. So in here, if you modify the scale, if you look at the picture, you can really bring out the zing of the colours. If you go too far, it can look really artificial. So the best thing to do is to choose a figure. I tend to choose somewhere between 1.1 and 1.2. On my screen here, that looks pretty good, so that's the value I'm going to go with. So right, that's accepted that. Another thing that you can adjust is one of the standard features on any kind of photo editing software is brightness and contrast. If you go into colours, there is indeed the brightness and contrast setting, and you can increase the brightness, decrease the brightness, and you can change the level of contrast, and you can slide these across to your heart's content. Personally, I find that changing the brightness does give a few problems with the contrast levels, and I prefer, this is just a personal preference, but I actually prefer a different option, which is the exposure option. So if you go into colours and exposure, in here you can increase the exposure level, and this is measured in stops. So if you go up by 1 stop, as you can see, everything becomes 1 stop brighter. But what you also see is that the contrast levels aren't dramatically affected. They still maintain their impact. I personally find this really useful, and that's why I tend to use it. For this image, I'm not going to go as far as 1 stop. I'm just going to take it up 0.3, and I like the kind of the darkness in the water. So I'm just going to leave it at 0.3 and click OK on that. And I'm pretty happy with that image so far. So if we compare it to the original image, you can see it is dramatically different. One final touch which works quite well if you have a strongish image where there's lots of clearly defined lines, is to increase the sharpness using the sharpness filter. To see the effect, really, probably the best thing to do is kind of zoom in a fair amount, and then to apply the sharpness you can go into filters, enhance, and then the sharpen unsharp mask. Within here you can alter the radius and the amount. Quite often I'll leave the amount at 0.5 and I'll fiddle about with the radius, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, and just play about with it a little bit until I'm kind of happy with the way it's looking. You can use the preview on and off to see how it's affecting the image, or you can also use the split view and you can see how much of a difference it's making. I think for this image I'm probably going to go for the radius of about 3. I think for me that's looking good. So I'll click OK on that, and there you go, that's your image finally created. If you've got any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm conscious that I've gone through an awful lot today, but what I'll do is I'll make sure all the commands that I've gone through are all listed in the notes underneath the video, and hopefully at least 1 or 2 of the things I've gone through today will help you to improve your images. Thanks a lot. Bye.